Now, the targetability on a centralized platform is like, it does have the impact of pushing people into silos. Like,
Sure.
It just does. And that's because everything is curated and your attention is finite and the platform wants you there and not on another platform. And this is the dynamic that determines the curation in your feed,
Yeah.
right? And so you do see, Substack and other folks being like, okay, well, now we're going to move to subscription models. But I do think that then you have a very different type of audience capture, right? Where you know that the audience is there, like this, becomes your livelihood for a lot of people, right? And podcasting is, I think, the same thing. You have your audience, you want to keep your audience there. And so telling your audience what they don't want to hear is not necessarily the best path to maintaining that audience and to good, to continuing good business. I think you may have an audience, like you, I think probably do, right? That prizes sort of reflectivity and nuance and things like that. But that's also because that's the community that you've curated, right? So ultimately, I think what it does come down to is I'm trying to remember who said it, like the phrase, like the problem with social media is people.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is that, it is in fact that, right? It's the human nature of like, we might like to hear more of what we want to hear, and whether that's an advertising based, kind of model that leads to particular curation mechanisms and, structuring of a feed. But when people are then kind of committing their capital, right, like subscribing to or patronizing a person, unless that person is really doing I think is really prioritizing not telling them what they want to hear, you do see that audience capture phenomenon beginning to start. And it's very siloed. That's the other thing I'll say, which is podcasts, sometimes it's hard to know what has been said, right? So on social media, everything's largely out there in the open unless it's happening in some closed group. Yeah. And more things do happen in closed groups because people don't want the visibility of having public conversations now. They know the internet might come for them, and that's scary. Podcasts, I think, I'm like, with like a finite number of hours in the day, sometimes I'm like, can I find a transcript of this?
Yeah.
I'd like to read that conversation where I can digest it in 5 minutes as opposed to 2 hours. Or Substack, where it's actually paywalled, right? Where I'm like, okay, what happens below the fold? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I it's a different form of engaging the intersection between attention, monetization, and human nature. So I don't know that I say it's like better or worse. I think that, again, the idea that it eliminates the bad side of tribalism or the other ideas that, very idealistic people put forth, I don't think that's true. I think it just manifests differently.
Yeah, the problem with media is people. It's like there is no fake news. We're the fake news, basically. But what I think is interesting with podcasts, and I guess this is true for all the mediums, and what I was trying to say in my book, and I think you say it well in yours, is like, the problem is also wherever there are people, there are going to be bad actors that try to shape or direct those people, right? I think what you find is that the kooks or the ideologues or the people with an agenda figure out the tools first and fastest and most effectively. So it's like, I thought podcasts would be this awesome thing, and they are this awesome thing, but then you're watching, people who can have access to legacy media, that I'm talking like politicians, leaders, companies, they're fine. The system's working for them.
Yeah.
And so it's the people who have the crazy ideas that have to go towards the new medium with the least resistance. And so for instance, I got invited to this this thing that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was doing, where it was like what I deduced is he's clearly flying around the country and having podcasting dinners where he has like a dinner, and then he invites the podcasters who live in that town to come. You have to pay. So he's raising money. And then what he's doing is he's seeding ideas to these people who are going to then go back to their audience. Right. And then some percentage of them will also have him on. And I'm like, it was just fascinating to me. Okay, yeah, here's this person who he's finding the media outlets that are being neglected by the bigger candidates, or the people who have the ideas, who have public platforms in some way, are not thinking, hey, how do I get out and talk on every single platform to get these ideas out there. And so you end up seeding the field, and then these people dominate those spaces. He's the master influencer. He's probably
he's very good. He's very good at what he does.
He made like $8 million last year, like as an influence grifter. And I think it's fascinating.
This was the, my frustration was, we dealt with him in 2015 during that law I wanted to get passed in California, right? And, and we had very particular ways of dealing with it just as like activist moms, which was like, well, we're going to mock the shit out of this actually, right? And it was, kind of fascinating to watch. Media generally will write like debunking articles. I was actually reading one on my way over here. They sort of dredge up some controversy from the past or something. Yeah. But what I think they don't necessarily understand is like they're speaking to the choir at that point, right? Yes. The people who are reading the Daily Beast are going to nod along and be like, yes, totally. But it's not actually reaching the base. It's not showing up there in that conversation. So it's different conversations happening in completely different places. What you said about the people who uncover things first. So I study what we call adversarial abuse online, right? And the adversary varies, but inevitably the first people to pull in and use new and novel technology are spammers and scammers. 100% of the time. When people are talking about generative AI and being very afraid of like the political implications, I'm like, it's actually the spammers and scammers who've been on it, right? That's what you see all over Facebook. Like it's documented. These are people who are like, I can take my cost to operate down. I can improve my margins. I can reach new people. I can do things where the rules haven't been written yet. And so you see it there first. And then, you do see the thing that was interesting, and you're absolutely correct about this, people who don't have access to major media spaces have also always been early adopters of social media because it is so user-created, right? Yeah. We all have the power to say whatever we want at this point. And you see this reflected also in how institutions react, which is, like I said, dealing with RFK Jr. in 2015 and, this vaccine law in California we wanted to pass. He continued to build a social media following over the years. Platforms struggled to figure out what to do about that, right? Where you actually see him starting to get, starting to raise hackles is during the Samoa measles outbreak of 2019. So it's actually pre-COVID, where about 85 kids died in that outbreak. And this is where you see the platforms begin to realize that Children's Health Defense and some of the other organizations, Children's Health Defense was absolutely instrumental in the propaganda around measles vaccines in Samoa because there was a terrible accident in which nurses had mixed a vial of a vaccine, not with water, but with some sort of muscle relaxant, and 2 kids died from a vaccine in Samoa, leading to the government halting the program. As they tried to figure out what had happened. They didn't realize that this was a nurse accident at the time. And Children's Health Defense is beating the drum about the measles vaccine killing kids and goes on and on and on. And as the result of the finding becomes apparent, they never communicate to their audience that this is what actually happened, that this was a horrible medical accident. And instead, they just continue to propagate, that type of fear and suspicion. And so you see this, you see the role that they play in these moments, like, again, having the sort of real world impact as all of a sudden there's a measles outbreak in Samoa about a year after the program's halted, and they institute a mandatory vaccine campaign because literally 85 children have died or are dying at the time. And these are kids under 5, right? And so you see the government trying to emergency vaccinate kids with, little kids. And the same audiences are out there attacking the government of Samoa on its Facebook page saying, no, it's the vaccine that caused the outbreak. No, it's the vaccine that's killing the kids. And again, this is long prior to COVID. Then you see Facebook trying to figure out, okay, what do we do about this now, right? And you start to see them trying to react. But it is that you don't see... So they have really dominated the social media ecosystem. They are the best at getting their message out. And then you see the government kind of putting out its statements and quotes in the media, on television. They don't have that networked infrastructure. Nothing that they say is going viral. So it's a completely different playing field. And you see this happen over and over and over again where the institution thinks like, oh, well, we're just going to get our message out in the Washington Post. And then people are going to believe us and everything is going to go back to normal. And they don't realize that sort of like people get invested when they participate is the other thing, right? And that's why when people are participating, as much as we might joke around about it being slacktivism or not actually having an impact, for them, it's having an impact, right? It's giving them the satisfaction.
Thing in their life.
It is a thing that they feel that they are able to do. They may not have any power to to make a change in the real world, but here online they can. And so it provides them with that that desire to feel like they're doing something. And this dynamic that's happening over here on the internet versus like the occasional pronouncements from on high in the media are two completely different ways of communicating. And, you know, ordinary people are spending their time over here now.
And that influence that they accumulate online becomes its own sort of currency or form of power, right? So I think I've been fascinated with friends of mine who will platform some of these people. And I know they don't actually think this or are not outright crazy. Maybe they're flirting with it, but they go, this person has a big audience, right? And so there's this kind of, like when everyone's kind of an influencer and they're not thinking, hey, what's true or not, or what do I believe or not, or what are my responsibilities or not? They're thinking, will this do well? Will this generate a reaction? So everyone's kind of this like weird professional wrestler, not doing professional wrestling, but like real consequences are a result of this. And it's hard to figure out the best way to communicate to people like this is real and it matters and it has consequences.
Yeah.